Hello and welcome back to another episode of Taco Tech Tips. Today's not Tuesday, sorry. It's been a really busy week with Thanksgiving, and I actually ended up moving the weekend before, so it's been quite a hectic week, but I'm going to try to get this video up before the weekend. Today we're going to talk about GR Fuel Stumble and what it is and how you can, you can't fix it, but how you can make it better. Specifically, what you can do to make the car run a little smoother and honestly just be safer in general. So first we have to talk about what is GR Stumble. And the first thing is, what is a GR? Here I drop in acronyms. GR is the chassis code, and it actually applies to GR and VA STIs and some WRXs. In fact, really you could go back and say it applies to all Subarus. But it is specifically really bad in the GR and the VA STI, which is 2008 and up STI, so 2008 to 2021. Subaru's never fixed this issue. They've come up with a few different ways to band-aid this issue, and in the process they've actually made it worse in some situations. So first thing we're going to do is show you what it is, what causes it, what it actually does. So here we have your pretty standard stage 2 STI. We've got an AEM intake, and we have I think it's an NVIDIA catted downpipe and exhaust. And this is, like I said, it's a GR. So this is a 2011. I'll double check that in a second. STI, but we have the Stumble, and because the car has been modified, intake and exhaust, the Stumble is considerably worse than it was when the car was stock. So I'm going to just kind of show you on the dyno driving what this Stumble actually looks like from a data standpoint. Alright, so here we are on the logger screen. And now what I have here is air fuel correction, engine RPM, and this is the final fueling target. So I can look at them all in the data form. I have some raw data, but I want to show you in the graph form what happens. So we're on the dyno, we're going to drive real quick. Turn some of these traction control things off here. There we go. So we're now at 3,000 RPMs, and look what our correction just did. It went crazy high. So let's go to another gear here. So we're going to cruise here at around 2,000 RPMs, and you can see our correction is pretty close to zero. But watch what happens as we come up to about 3,000 RPMs. Correction going plus, 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 clear up to 25%. Now as I continue to go up in the RPMs, the correction comes back down. And when you're driving the car, you can feel that correction. So that is the actual representation of what the GR Stumble is. It is a fuel trim that goes up, 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 up to 25%, because we're seeing airflow that's coming through the engine that's not being metered correctly. So why isn't it being metered correctly, or is it being metered correctly, and is there something else going on? So we're going to go back to the engine bay, and I'm going to show you real quick one of the contributing factors. And that's the thing about the GR Stumble, is there's not one specific thing that causes it, and there's not one specific thing that fixes it. And honestly, because I've done this, if you talk to 10 different tuners, you'll get 10 different ideas of what the cause and solution is. Ultimately, if you look on Cobb's website, they have a pretty good link to a whole write-up about what the causes and some of the solutions are to the GR Stumble. And it's a pretty good, you know, they have a lot of data that shows you what's actually happening. But for the most part, about 80% of the Stumble, maybe like 50% of the Stumble, is actually a fuel delivery issue, not an air metering issue. So let's go show you what we have going on with the fuel delivery. Alright, so here we are in the engine bay, and what we have here is the fuel pressure regulator and feed assembly. It's kind of all in one on these cars, and this is the VA and GR STI, so 2008 and up STI. What we have, this is actually the feed line here, and it comes into the fuel rail, and then it goes down in the fuel rails, and they're in series, so it feeds one rail, and then it goes to the other side and feeds the other rail, and then it comes back to the fuel pressure regulator, which is here. Now it's all built into one kind of assembly, but it is two separate things. They're just welded together in the middle. But we have a very strange thing right here. This is actually a bypass. So what it's doing is your pressure comes in here, most of it goes that way, but it also goes to the back of the rail to fill the whole system all at once, is kind of the object of that. And in doing so, we are bypassing fuel away from the injectors in the fuel rails, which seems kind of dumb if you ask me and most other people that work on these cars all the time. So I don't know why those zip ties were there. Anyway, oh, because that's broken. So their clips are already broken in there, but so you can see this one isn't welded. Sorry, I think the VAs are welded. But anyway, so this is actually a fuel damper, so it dampens the pulses as they come out of the fuel pump. And this is the pressure regulator, and then there's a vacuum line from the pressure regulator going to the cylinder number 4 runner, and that's important that we talk about that, or remember that that's where this reference is coming from, because this comes into play in a minute. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to get rid of any sort of fuel pressure oscillations that we might have in this system, and having the design with the damper and this return is not a sufficient way of doing things. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this. I'm just going to delete this damper altogether, and I've built kind of a little kit that I put in lots of these cars that deletes this damper, and it does a pretty good job of solving, honestly, the majority of the stumbled issue. So I'll show you that in 1 second. So this is it here. It's super simple. It is just a plug for that side line and a straight through hose connector, and I put this little bit of hose in the middle. It's actually just a straight through pipe, but just to make it look a little bit prettier. So I'm going to go ahead and install this real fast, and then show you what's changed. The only tools you need for this job, I use these nice hose splitters. They make getting these off a lot easier. If these don't work, then I will sometimes use a pair of ring pliers to help, and then just a Phillips head screwdriver. Pretty straightforward installation. This takes about 5 minutes. I don't even charge people for this when I'm tuning their cars, at least this installation. I think we charge them like 20 bucks or something for the parts, just because of shop supplies and whatnot. But I do believe we are currently building some nice billet machined ones that we'll see here in the near future. Anytime you're working around fuel stuff, you want to make sure that you're not just going to spray fuel everywhere. But first thing, there's a tube side and a hose side. Get the tube side on there. So anytime you're working around fuel, you want to be careful, because things can be under pressure and they can shoot fuel out. So you want to make sure you're wearing at least safety glasses or some sort of eye protection. But we're going to go ahead and get this off. Now it might shoot a little fuel. There we go. I already let the pressure out of the system. There's really no good way to let the pressure out of the system. It's just going to kind of shoot fuel. You can disconnect those. No matter what, it's going to shoot fuel. It's just what happens. But it's not usually too bad. See how easy that is? So this is what I call the squid. Looks kind of like a squid, so we're dripping a little fuel. I'm going to turn the fans on, and that'll blow all this fuel vapor out before I start the car. Really, like, as long as you leave the hood open for a little while, it's not typically an issue. So we're going to go ahead and install this guy. Feed line right in. If you do it wrong, you'll know when you try to start the car and it doesn't start. Into the other side. It should pretty much go all the way together. Come on now. And then I put the plug in this one and tighten that down. Now this isn't actually what our final solution here is going to be, but this is, just wanted to be able to show everyone. That's in there. I must have cut that center hose a little bit too short. But like I said, since this isn't going to be our final solution, I'm not going to make it super pretty. I just want to show what we're doing here. So we deleted a damper, which ultimately you would want dampers if you could have dampers. But since the damper that we had is trying to bypass fuel away from the rails, we don't want it. So instead of having that damper, we're going to have no damper. But I think you'll be surprised as to what changes. Oh. No fuel leaking. And like I said, if you were doing this for real and this was going to be your final install, you'd want to zip tie stuff up, make it nice and pretty. But we're not. This is just to show the difference in the Stumble. Okay, we're connected now. I don't know what's going on. There we go. Put a little Stumble. The logger. Alright, so we're going to drive it again. You can see our correction is pretty solid at 0%. Engine speed's at like 800. So here we go. And just drive it up. Oh, traction control off. Silly car. Differential and manual. Alright. So here we are approaching 3,000 RPMs, and now look, we're only at a 7% fuel trim. Let's go into second gear. Here we are approaching 3,000. Again, only 7%. So that little $20 mod, as you could just see, $20 or less, honestly, just fixed that entire fuel trim issue. Why is that? That's crazy. You wouldn't ever expect something so simple and something that seems to be a no-brainer from Subaru. Why would they do that? Why would they set this up that way? Well, this is it's a difficult discussion topic because we're not the Subaru engineer that invented this or decided to set it up. But for some reason they felt like it was necessary to do that. So anyway, as you can see, that just fixed that fuel trim issue, which ultimately is the GR Stumble, with a super simple, very basic fix. Now, on some cars, it doesn't fix the issue. So we have to go to what I call level 2, which is where we change the vacuum reference. And by changing the vacuum reference, I had talked about it coming off of cylinder 4. We will change it to go to an averaged vacuum source instead of a single runner. Cars with cams, this is really important because at idle and low airflow, the individual pulses from the runner kind of create a waveform, which causes the regulator diaphragm to open and close and makes it not run as smooth. But anyway, like I said, as you can see, just cruising around, and we'll go over to the data so you can see numbers. Here's our corrections. We're actually pulling a little bit of fuel here, but it doesn't add a 25% trim like it was. In fact, if you take the positive and the negative, you're almost at 0 there. See, we're pulling a little fuel, which I can tune out that little pull. But important thing, the problem is, for all intents and purposes, solved. So let's say we did this mod and we were still seeing a high fuel trim, especially under light load and whatnot. What could we do to help fix that problem? Well, one of the issues is that the small diaphragm on that regulator is very prone to things like vacuum oscillation and change. So what we often do, and this is actually kind of a double whammy of awesome, is we'll install a fuel pressure regulator like one of these TurboSmart ones, which are pretty and functional. You got a little bracket in the box and a really, really terrible sticker. Honestly, I don't know why they ship these. You listening, Marty? Fix your stickers. I know, stickers are expensive. But we have the actual regulator here. And we love these regulators. They're simple, they're compact, and they work. And they fix our issue. So this is the regulator, and I'm not going to take this apart for like a proper unboxing because I just want to install it and get it going. Do have to get this car done so the customer can have it and drive it. So anyway, doesn't come with a gauge, but they sell gauges for the low price of a couple more dollars. This one's actually a radium. Looks like that's what we have in stock. Sometimes we stock the Turbo Smart ones, but it seems like we are currently stocking the radium ones. And Radium makes great stuff. They're a local company, although this gauge is made in Taiwan, so it's just a rebranded gauge from somewhere else. Anyway, it's pretty. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this installed. For the installation of this, we have to get this whole regulator assembly out. And I'm just gonna take it off at the rails. Special tool time. If you work on a lot of Subarus, these little fuel clips, quick connect disconnects are super handy to have. Just remember, the top is the feed, the bottom's the return on this particular year. I'm going to quiz you on that later. For the sake of not making this a 20-minute video, I'm just going to do a nice little BAM installed. So you ready? Here we go. And 3, 2, 1. Voila! Voila! So I haven't hooked the vacuum line up to this yet. Now that we're all installed, I haven't hooked the vacuum line up to this quite yet, and there's a reason for that, and that is because I want to set the base pressure. And on these Subarus, the base pressure is 43.5 psi. But if you have a vacuum line, the base pressure won't be right. And if you let the car idle for more than about 30 seconds, the base pressure won't be right. Also, if you have a humongous fuel pump and it's overrunning the return into the tank, it won't be right. So it's pretty critical that it's right. So we're gonna fire it up and then adjust it and see where we are. So I'm gonna go ahead and set the adjustment screw loose on this guy to start this with, because you pretty much always have to adjust them. At least you always should check them. So I'm gonna loosen that up a little bit. And we have our Allen key ready. Make sure it's the right one. I feel like a switch around, but yeah, that's good. So let's start it up and set the pressure. Fired up, no leaks. That's always a good sign. So now we're gonna see where we're at. We're actually at closer to 60 psi right now. It's not where we want to be. I said you have about 30 seconds to get this set. And that's 45, right about there. Tighten down the jam nut. And you can see how the pressure just dropped. That's because the fuel pump just kicked from 100% down to 33%. So checking your fuel pressure idle does not always give you a good indication. All right, I'm gonna hook up the vacuum line. Now for the vacuum line, we're not gonna come from the factory port here. We're actually gonna come from an averaged spot, which I usually come off of here. You could come from the blow-off valve one if you wanted. Either one is acceptable. In fact, we might do the blow-off valve on this car, just because of shortness of run. So, and a T, because the blow-off valve comes off the bottom of the, right down there. Cutter, and T. That T is a little big. I'm gonna go get a smaller T. Normally this doesn't have this extra loop, but that's where we've got our dyno pickup right now. So that's going to sit about like that, so then we'll run the vacuum line over. Super critical anytime you do vacuum lines for fuel pressure regulators is you zip tie everything. You don't want to use just any giant zip tie. You want to use appropriately sized zip ties. If you don't, you'll end up not actually doing much clamping. You can use spring clamps if you can get the right size. Again, you have to make sure you have the exact right size, especially the spring clamps. They're not really readily available in the correct sizes because it's the outer diameter of the vacuum line that you're using. And different vacuum line has different outer diameters, so it's kind of tricky. Last thing, I always flush cut all my zip ties. These little flush cutters, you can get them at jewelry stores or on Amazon. They're only a couple of bucks, but they keep you from cutting yourself on your zip tie down the road. Now we're ready to start this thing up and see what our stumble looks like, or lack of stumble. All right, now again, we're going to notice we're pulling some fuel. So this is our AF correction and AF learning 1. We clear the min and max. We're pulling about 10%. Now I have the base pressure set and everything, so we'll see what happens when we drive up to about 3,000 RPMs. My guess is we're going to start pulling a bunch again. Notice how far down we are now. Now there's also a long-term trim. If you look, so we're pulling a bunch of fuel, almost 15% now. So we now have gone in the opposite direction. For some reason the car thinks it has too much fuel. And it's not a fuel pressure issue, so what could it be? Well, we're going to go in and look at the tune, and I'm going to show you exactly what it is and how we know that Subaru knew that this was an issue long before we ever saw one of these cars in the dyno. So here we are, we have a stock ECU image, and you can see here, stock boost map. That's usually the easiest way to tell that you're stock. We're actually a 2012 STI. Customer said it was an 11. It's always fun to find these things out. Anyway, so what we're doing is we're coming down here to the mass airflow section, because in there we have this thing right here called engine load compensation. And when we look at it, we see that the factory, I hope that this is readable. It might not be. Sorry, I need to get a screen capture program. But what you can see here, maybe if I highlight it, it's readable. We have a pretty significant, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll view a graph. We have a pretty significant, we're upside down, there we go. This right here is them right at, you can see 2,700 to 3,000 RPMs. They start using a crazy high load compensation to make the car think that it has more load than it actually does. So here's the other one, same thing. This is basically TGV's open or TGV's closed. So remember I was saying we're now adding a bunch of, or we're now subtracting a bunch of fuel from the tune? Well, that's because we fixed the problem with the car. And by fixing the problem with the car, we need to get rid of this band-aid that Subaru did, where they were adding a bunch of fuel arbitrarily without trying to change the airflow numbers. They were just trying to make the car think it had more load than it did in those areas in order to have it add more fuel. So we're going to save this and flash it, and I'll show you what we have now. Alright, so we flashed the car, start it up. So let's reset this data and start viewing. So you'll notice the fuel pump duty cycle here is at 100%. And if we went out and looked, the pressure would be higher, and then it's going to drop to 33% after the car runs for about 30 seconds or so. We have no fuel trims currently because it just started up after a flash. So there we go, air fuel sensor. Because the pressure's a little higher, you always see them start up, and there's some post-start enrichments and whatnot. So we're still pulling a little bit of fuel, but I bet you'll see in just a second that that's going to dial down a little bit, maybe down to 3 or 4%. So yeah, there we go. 5 or 6 is fine. We haven't tuned this car yet. It's on a stock map, and it does have some parts on it. So stuff's not going to be perfect, but it should be close. So now we're going to drive a little bit and see what happens here. Notice now, we're still pulling a little bit, but we're not even up in the RPMs. There it is. Only 5%. Looks like we're pulling about 5% across the board. So we'll probably just take that out of the tune because we did add some fuel flow here. But you can see it's a much more consistent fuel trim, 5-6%. We'll go over to the graph so you can see it a little bit better. But we don't have this crazy up and down, and this is something that's easily tunable. So you can see it's a very consistent fuel trim even as we go up in RPMs. Go down to about 2%. There we go. Came to +2. Anyway, we probably have some long terms happening again. I should have shut off long-term learning just for the sake of what we're doing here, but anyway, so that fixes the GR Stumble by changing the way that we deliver the fuel to the car. It's pretty spiffy. Well, changing the way we deliver the fuel to the car and getting rid of this silly factory engine load compensation. The reason why I did this video, I had somebody just the other day asking about this table and whether it was something that we tuned or not, and they didn't provide any information, what year the car was, whatnot. It turned out it was an 06 WRX, where you don't really use this table, but on the GRs and VAs, this table is a very important table because from the factory it's actually doing something, and it's doing something pretty major. Like I'd said, you can see the, oops, come on, let me use the undo feature here. You can see they were adding 20% load in some spots there, and then subtracting load down higher. So anyway, we're just going to leave that at 0, and I'm going to go ahead and tune this car and actually make some power on it. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about the GR Stumble and how to fix it, what causes it, and hopefully you learned something. And if you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the video, or subscribe to the channel, so that you can keep seeing this content every Tuesday, or occasionally not on a Tuesday like this time. So thanks for watching and enjoy. Real quick, and we're just gonna see that everything is all happy. Normally you can really kind of feel and hear that GR Stumble as you approach 3,000, but the car, as you just saw, it didn't like nose over or anything. Sorry, it got dark out, so we're not going to be able to see so well. See no stumble at 3,000, not even at heavier throttle. Nothing at all. We'll slow back down. We'll accelerate hard through 3,000. Turbo Sport, but no stutter between 2,500 and 3,000, which is what we're looking for. It pulls smooth, feels pretty good. And I can show you here on the logger, once we get around this corner here, we'll show you on the logger, just driving at about 3,000, that we're pretty good. And so here you are right at 3,000, and we're pulling about 3 to 4% total fuel trim. So that's pretty solid. That's what we're trying, that's what we're after. And there's no, like I said, there's no noticeable hesitation as you accelerate through. So everything looks great. We're in Sport Sharp now. No hesitation at all. Can slow down, can drive through it smoothly. Nothing. It's perfect. So here's a little more of this data log here. So you can see right there where it's 3,300 RPMs, but we can even come back here to about 3,000 during a pull or during just kind of cruise. You can see our fuel trims are almost zero, negative 1.56 and 0 there. Come back down to the previous gear, same thing, only about a percentage off. So you can see we've definitely fixed the stumble stutter issue. Now I'll tell you, I mean, it's hard to show how well a car drives on a video like this, how smooth it is, but this car is butter smooth, especially through that low RPM kind of normal stumble range.